This recording is dedicated to the innocent Southern citizens who were atrociously attacked by the vicious Northern invaders. A Woman's Wartime Journal, an account of the passage over a Georgia plantation of Sherman's army on the march to the sea, as recorded in the diary of Dolly Sumner Lunt, Mrs. Thomas Burge, with an introduction and notes by Julian Street. Published in New York by the Century Company, 1918. Introduction. Though Southern rural life has necessarily changed since the Civil War, I doubt that there is in the entire South a place where it has changed less than on the Burge plantation near Covington, Georgia. And I do not know in the whole country a place that I should rather see again in springtime. The Georgia springtime, when the air is like a tonic vapor distilled from the earth, from pine trees, tulip trees, balm of Gilead trees, blossoming Judas trees, Georgia crabapple, dogwood, pink and white, peach blossom, wisteria, sweet shrub, dog violets, pansy violets, Cherokee roses, wild honeysuckle, azalea, and the effervescent green of new treetops, all carried in solution in the sunlight. It is indicative of the fidelity of the plantation to its old traditions that though more than 60 springs have come and gone since Sherman and his army crossed the red cotton fields surrounding the plantation house, and though the Burge family name died out many years ago with Mrs. Thomas Burge, a portion of whose wartime journal makes up the body of this book, the place continues to be known by her name and her husband's, as it was when they resided there before the Civil War. Some of the negroes mentioned in the journal still live in cabins on the plantation, and almost all the younger generation are the children or grandchildren of Mrs. Burge's former slaves. Mrs. Burge, Dolly Sumner Lunt, was born September 29, 1817, in Baldwinham, Maine. That she was brought up in New England in the heart of the abolitionist movement, and that she was a relative of Charles Sumner, consistent foe of the South, lends peculiar interest to the sentiments on slavery expressed in her journal. As a young woman, she moved from Maine to Georgia, where her married sister was already settled. While teaching school in Covington, she met Thomas Burge, a plantation owner and gentleman of the Old South, and presently married him. When some years later Mr. Burge died, Mrs. Burge was left on the plantation with her little daughter Sarah, the Sadie of the journal, and her slaves, numbering about 100. Less than 3 years after she was widowed, the Civil War broke out, and in 1864 this cultivated and charming woman saw Sherman's army pass across her fields on the march to the sea. At the time of my visit to the plantation, the world was aghast over the German invasion of Belgium, the horrors of which had but recently been fully revealed and confirmed. What, then, I began to wonder, must life have been in this part of Georgia when Sherman's men came by? What must it have been to the woman and the little girl living on these acres, in this very house? For though Germany's assault was upon an offending neutral state, and was the commencement of a base war, whereas Sherman's march through Georgia was an invasion of what was then the enemy's country for the purpose of breaking the back of that enemy, and thus terminating the war. Nevertheless, military necessity was the excuse in either case for a campaign of deliberate destruction, which, in the state of Georgia, was measured by Sherman himself at 100 millions. When, therefore, I learned that Mrs. Burge had kept a journal in which were related her experiences throughout this period, I began but when, therefore, I learned that Mrs. Burge had kept a journal in which were related her experiences throughout this period, I became eager to see it, and I am sure the reader will agree that I did him a good turn when, after perusing the journal, I begged its author's granddaughters, Mrs. M. J. Morehouse of Evanston, Illinois, and Mrs. Louis Bolton of Detroit, Michigan, my hostesses at the plantation, that they permit it to be published. Their consent having graciously been given, I can only wish that the reader might sit, as I did, perusing the story in the very house, in the very room in which it was written. I wish he might turn the yellow pages with me, and read for himself of events which seem somehow more vivid for the fact that the ink is faded brown with time. And I wish that when the journal tells of bluecoats coming down the road, the reader might glance up and out through the open window, as I did, and see the very road down which they came. Imagine yourself in a low white house standing in a grove of gigantic oaks surrounded by the cotton fields. Imagine yourself in a large, comfortable room in this house, in an old rocking chair by the window. From the window you may see the white well house, its roof mottled with the shadows of branches above. Beyond the garden and road, and far away in the red fields, negroes and mules at work. Then look down at the large book resting in your lap and read. Julian Street, New York, March 1918. January 1, 1864. A new year is ushered in, but peace comes not with it. Scarcely a family but has given some of its members to the bloody war that is still decimating our nation. Oh, that its ravages may soon be stopped! Will another year find us among carnage and bloodshed? Shall we be a nation, or shall we be annihilated? The prices of everything are very high. Corn $7 a bushel, calico $10 a yard, salt $60 a hundred, cotton from 60 to 80 cents a pound, everything in like ratio. July 22nd, 1864, the day of the Battle of Atlanta. We have heard the loud booming of cannon all day. Mr. Ward, the overseer, went over to the burial of Thomas Harwell, whose death I witnessed yesterday. They had but just gone when the Reverend A. Turner, wife, and daughter drove up with their wagons, desiring to rest awhile. They went into the L, the large back room, and lay down, I following them, wishing to enjoy their company. Suddenly I saw the servants running to the palings, and I walked to the door, when I saw such a stampede as I never witnessed before. The road was full of carriages, wagons, men on horseback, all riding at full speed. Judge Floyd stopped, saying, "Mrs. Burge, the Yankees are coming. They have got my family, and here is all I have upon earth. Hide your mules and carriages and whatever valuables you have." Sadie, Mrs. Burge's 9-year-old daughter, said, "Oh, Mamma, what shall we do?" "Never mind, Sadie," I said. "They won't hurt you, and you must help me hide my things." I went to the smokehouse, divided out the meat to the servants, and bid them hide it. Julia, a slave, took a jar of lard and buried it. In the meantime, Sadie was taking down and picking up our clothes, which she was giving to the servants to hide in their cabins. Silk dresses, chalices, muslins and merinos, linens and hosiery, all found their way into the chests of the women and under their beds. China and silver were buried underground, and Sadie bid Mary, a slave, hide a bit of soap under some bricks, that Mamma might have a little left. Then she came to me with a part of a loaf of bread, asking if she had not better put it in her pocket, that we might have something to eat that night. And verily, we had cause to fear that we might be homeless, for on every side we could see smoke arising from burning buildings and bridges. Major Ainsley, who was wounded in the hip in the battle of Missionary Ridge and has not recovered, came with his wife, sister, 2 little ones, and servants. He was traveling in a bed in a small wagon. They had thought to get to Eatonton, but he was so wearied that they had to stop with me for the night. I am glad to have them. I shall sleep none tonight. The woods are full of refugees. July 23rd, 1864. I have been left in my home all day with no one but Sadie. Have seen nothing of the raiders, though this morning they burned the buildings around the depot at the Circle. I have sat here in the porch nearly all day and hailed every one that passed for news. Just as the sun set here, Major Ainsley and family came back. They heard of the enemy all about and concluded they were as safe here as anywhere. Just before bedtime, John, our boy, came from Covington with word that the Yankees had left. Wheeler's men were in Covington and going in pursuit. We slept sweetly and felt safe. Sunday, July 24th, 1864. No church. Our preacher's horse was stolen by the Yankees. This raid is headed by Girard and is for the purpose of destroying our railroads. They cruelly shot a George Daniel and a Mr. Jones of Covington, destroyed a great deal of private property, and took many citizens prisoners. July 27th, 1864. Major Ainsley and family have remained. We are feeling more settled and have begun to bring to light some of the things which we had put away. July 28, 1864. I rose early and had the boys plow the turnip patch. We were just rising from breakfast when Ben Glass rose up with the cry, "The Yankees are coming! Mrs. Burge, hide your mules!" How we were startled, and how we hurried the major to his room. The Yankees did not come that day, but it was thought best to send Major Ainsley away. He left at 2 a.m. July 29th, 1864. Sleepless nights. The report is that the Yankees have left Covington for Macon, headed by Stoneman, to release prisoners held there. They robbed every house on the road of its provisions, sometimes taking every piece of meat, blankets and wearing apparel, silver and arms of every description. They would take silk dresses and put them under their saddles, and many other things for which they had no use. Is this the way to make us love them and their union? Let the poor people answer whom they have deprived of every mouthful of meat, and of their livestock to make any. Our mills, too, they have burned, destroying an immense amount of property. August 2nd, 1864. Just as I got out of bed this morning, Aunt Julia called me to look down the road and see the soldiers. I peeped through the blinds, and there they were, sure enough, the Yankees, the bluecoats. I was not dressed. The servant women came running in. "Mistress, they are coming! They are coming! They are riding into the lot! There are two coming up the steps!" I bade Rachel fasten my room door and go to the front door and ask them what they wanted. They did not wait for that, but came in and asked why my door was fastened. She told them that the white folks were not up. They said they wanted breakfast, and that quick, too. Thug, short for Sugar, the nickname of a little girl, Minnie Minerva Glass, now Mrs. Joe Carey Murphy of Charlotte, North Carolina, who had come to pass the night with Sadie. And Sadie, as well as myself, were greatly alarmed. As soon as I could get on my clothing, I hastened to the kitchen to hurry up breakfast. 6 of them were there talking with my women. They asked about our soldiers, and passing themselves off as Wheeler's men, said, "Have you seen any of our men go by?" "Several of Wheeler's men passed last evening. Who are you?" said I. "We are a portion of Wheeler's men," said one. "You look like Yankees," said I. "Yes," said one, stepping up to me. "We are Yankees. Did you ever see one before?" "Not for a long time," I replied, "and none such as you." These men, Mrs. Burge says further, were raiders, Illinois and Kentucky men of German origin. They left after breakfast, taking 3 of her best mules, but doing no further injury. Tonight, Captain Smith of an Alabama regiment and a squad of 20 men are camped opposite in the field. They have all supped with me, and I shall breakfast with them. We have spent a pleasant evening with music and talk. They have a prisoner along. I can't help feeling sorry for him. August 5th, 1864. Mr. Ward has been robbed by the Yankees of his watch, pencil, and shirt. November 8, 1864. Today will probably decide the fate of the Confederacy. If Lincoln is reelected, I think our fate is a hard one, but we are in the hands of a merciful God, and if he sees that we are in the wrong, I trust that he will show it unto us. I have never felt that slavery was altogether right, for it is abused by men, and I have often heard Mr. Burge say that if he could see that it was sinful for him to own slaves, and if he felt that it was wrong, he would take them where he could free them. He would not send for his right hand. The purest and holiest men have owned them, and I can see nothing in the Scriptures which forbids it. I have never bought or sold slaves, and I have tried to make life easy and pleasant to those that have been bequeathed me by the dead. I have never ceased to work. Many a Northern housekeeper has a much easier time than a Southern matron with her 100 negroes. November 12, 1864. Warped and putting dresses for the loom. Oh, this blockade gives us work to do for all hands. November 15, 1864. Went up to Covington today to pay the Confederate tax. Did not find the commissioners. Mid, a slave, drove me with Beck and the buggy. Got home about 3 o'clock. How very different is Covington from what it used to be, and how little did they who tore down the old flag and raised the new realize the results that have ensued. November 16th, 1864. As I could not obtain in Covington what I went for in the way of dye stuffs, etc., I concluded this morning, in accordance with Mrs. Ward's wish, to go to the Circle. We took Old Dutch and had a pleasant ride, as it was a delightful day. But how dreary looks the town! Where formerly all was bustle and business, now naked chimneys and bare walls, for the depot and surroundings were all burned by last summer's raiders. Engaged to sell some bacon and potatoes. Obtained my dye stuffs. Paid 7 Confederate dollars a pound for coffee, $6 an ounce for indigo, $20 for a quire of paper, $5 for 10 cents worth of flax thread, $6 for pins, and $40 for a bunch of factory thread. On our way home we met Brother Evans, accompanied by John Hinton, who inquired if we had heard that the Yankees were coming. He said that a large force was in Stockbridge, that the Home Guard was called out, and that it was reported that the Yankees were on their way to Savannah. We rode home chatting about it, and finally settled it in our minds that it could not be so. Probably a foraging party. Just before night I walked up to Joe Perry's to know if they had heard anything of the report. He was just starting off to join the Home Guard, being one of them. November 17th, 1864. Have been uneasy all day. At night some of the neighbors who have been to town called. They said it was a large force moving very slowly. What shall I do? Where go? November 18th, 1864. Slept very little last night. Went outdoors several times and could see large fires like burning buildings. Am I not in the hands of a merciful God who has promised to take care of the widow and orphan? Sent off 2 of my mules in the night. Mr. Ward and Frank, a slave, took them away and hid them. In the morning took a barrel of salt, which had cost me $200, into one of the black women's gardens, put a paper over it, and then on top of that leached ashes. Fixed on it a board as a leach tub, daubing it with ashes. Had some few pieces of meat taken from my smokehouse carried to the old place and hidden under some fodder. Bid them hide the wagon and gear, and then go on plowing. Went to packing up mine and Sadai's clothes. I fear that we shall be homeless. The boys came back and wished to hide their mules. They say that the Yankees camped at Mr. Gibson's last night and are taking all the stock in the county. Seeing them so eager, I told them to do as they pleased. They took them off, and Elbert, the black coachman, took his 40 fattening hogs to the old place swamp and turned them in. We have done nothing all day. That is, my people have not. I made a pair of pants for Jack, a slave, sent Newt up to Mrs. Perry's on an errand. On his way back he said 2 Yankees met him and begged him to go with them. They asked if we had livestock, and came up the road as far as Mrs. Laura Perry's. I sat for an hour expecting them, but they must have gone back. Oh, how I trust I am safe. Mr. Ward is very much alarmed. November 19th, 1864. Slept in my clothes last night as I heard the Yankees went to neighbor Montgomery's on Thursday night at 1 o'clock, searched his house, drank his wine, and took his money and valuables. As we were not disturbed, I walked after breakfast with Sadie up to Mr. Joe Perry's, my nearest neighbor, where the Yankees were yesterday. Saw Mrs. Laura Perry in the road surrounded by her children, seeming to be looking for someone. She said she was looking for her husband, that old Mrs. Perry had just sent her word that the Yankees went to James Perry's the night before, plundered his house, and drove off all his stock, and that she must drive hers into the old fields. Before we were done talking, up came Joe and Jim Perry from their hiding place. Jim was very much excited. Happening to turn and look behind as we stood there, I saw some blue coats coming down the hill. Jim immediately raised his gun, swearing he would kill them anyhow. "No, don't," said I, and ran home as fast as I could with Sadie. I could hear them cry, "Halt! Halt!" and their guns went off in quick succession. Oh God, the time of trial has come. A man passed on his way to Covington. I hallooed him, asking him if he did not know the Yankees were coming. "No, are they?" "Yes," said I. "They are not 300 yards from here." "Sure enough," said he. "Well, I'll not go. I don't want them to get my horse." And although within hearing of their guns, he would stop and look for them. Blissful ignorance, not knowing, not hearing, he has not suffered the suspense, the fear that I have for the past 48 hours. I walk to the gate. There they come filing up. I hastened back to my frightened servants and told them that they had better hide, and then went back to the gate to claim protection and a guard. But like demons they rush in. My yards are full. To my smokehouse, my dairy, pantry, kitchen, and cellar, like famished wolves they come, breaking locks and whatever is in their way. The 1,000 pounds of meat in my smokehouse is gone in a twinkling. My flour, my meat, my lard, butter, eggs, pickles of various kinds, both in vinegar and brine, wine, jars, and jugs are all gone. My 18 fat turkeys, my hens, chickens, and fowls, my young pigs, are shot down in my yard and hunted as if they were rebels themselves. Utterly powerless, I ran out and appealed to the guard. "I cannot help you, madam. It is orders." As I stood there from my lot, I saw driven, first, Old Dutch, my dear old buggy horse, who has carried my beloved husband so many miles, and who would so quietly wait at the block for him to mount and dismount, and who at last drew him to his grave. Then came old Mary, my brood mare, who for years had been too old and stiff for work, with her 3-year-old colt, my 2-year-old mule, and her last little baby colt. There they go. There go my mules, my sheep, and worse than all, my boys. Alas! Little did I think, while trying to save my house from plunder and fire, that they were forcing my boys from home at the point of the bayonet. One, Newton, jumped into bed in his cabin and declared himself sick. Another crawled under the floor. A lame boy he was, but they pulled him out, placed him on a horse, and drove him off. Mid, poor Mid, the last I saw of him, a man had him going around the garden, looking, as I thought, for my sheep, as he was my shepherd. Jack came crying to me, the big tears coursing down his cheeks, saying they were making him go. I said, "Stay in my room." But a man followed in, cursing him and threatening to shoot him if he did not go. So poor Jack had to yield. James Arnold, in trying to escape from a back window, was captured and marched off. Henry, too, was taken. I know not how or when, but probably when he and Bob went after the mules. I had not believed they would force from their homes the poor doomed negroes, but such has been the fact here, cursing them and saying that Jeff Davis wanted to put them in his army, but that they should not fight for him but for the Union. No, indeed, no. They are not friends to the slave. We have never made the poor Negro fight, and it is strange, passing strange, that the all-powerful Yankee nation, with the whole world to back them, their ports open, their armies filled with soldiers from all nations, should at last take the poor Negro to help them out against this little Confederacy, which was to have been brought back into the Union in 60 days' time. My poor boys, my poor boys, what unknown trials are before you! How you have clung to your mistress and assisted her in every way you knew! Never have I corrected them. A word was sufficient. Never have they known want of any kind. Their parents are with me, and how sadly they lament the loss of their boys. Their cabins are rifled of every valuable, the soldiers swearing that their Sunday clothes were the white people's, and that they never had money to get such things as they had. Poor Frank's chest was broken open, his money and tobacco taken. He has always been a money-making and saving boy. Not infrequently has his crop brought him $500 and more. All of his clothes and Rachel's clothes, which dear Lou gave her before her death, and which she had packed away, were stolen from her. Ovens, skillets, coffee mills, of which we had 3, coffee pots, not one have I left. Sifters, all gone. Seeing that the soldiers could not be restrained, the guard ordered me to have their remaining possessions brought into my house, which I did, and they all, poor things, huddled together in my room, fearing every movement that the house would be burned. A Captain Weber from Illinois came into my house. Of him I claimed protection from the vandals who were forcing themselves into my room. He said that he knew my brother Orrington. At that name I could not restrain my feelings, but, bursting into tears, implored him to see my brother and let him know my destitution. I saw nothing before me but starvation. He promised to do this, and comforted me with the assurance that my dwelling house would not be burned, though my outbuildings might. Poor little Sadie went crying to him as to a friend, and told him that they had taken her doll, Nancy. He begged her to come and see him, and he would give her a fine waxen one. The doll was found later in the yard of a neighbor, where a soldier had thrown it, and was returned to the little girl. Her children later played with it, and it is now the plaything of her granddaughter. He felt for me, and I gave him and several others the character of gentlemen. I don't believe they would have molested women and children had they had their own way. He seemed surprised that I had not laid away in my house flour and other provisions. I did not suppose I could secure them there more than where I usually kept them, for in last summer's raid houses were thoroughly searched. In parting with him, I parted as with a friend. Sherman himself and a greater portion of his army passed my house that day. All day, as the sad moments rolled on, they were passing not only in front of my house, but from behind. They tore down my garden palings, made a road through my backyard and lot field, driving their stock and riding through, tearing down my fences and desolating my home, wantonly doing it when there was no necessity for it. Such a day, if I live to be the age of Methuselah, may God spare me from ever seeing again. As night drew its sable curtains around us, the heavens from every point were lit up with fires from burning buildings. Dinnerless and supperless as we were, it was nothing in comparison with the fear of being driven out homeless to the dreary woods. Nothing to eat. I could give my guard no supper, so he left us. I appealed to another, asking him if he had a wife, mother, or sister, and how he should feel were they in my situation. A colonel from Vermont left me 2 men, but they were Dutch, and I could not understand one word they said. My Heavenly Father alone saved me from the destructive fire. My carriage house had in it 8 bales of cotton, with my carriage, buggy, and harness. On top of the cotton were some carded cotton rolls, 100 pounds or more. These were thrown out of the blanket in which they were, and a large twist of the rolls taken and set on fire and thrown into the boat of my carriage, which was close up to the cotton bales. Thanks to my God, the cotton only burned over and then went out. Shall I ever forget this deliverance? Tonight, when the greater part of the army had passed, it came up very windy and cold. My room was full, nearly, with the negroes and their bedding. They were afraid to go out, for my women could not step out of the door without an insult from the Yankee soldiers. They lay down on the floor. Sadie got down and under the same cover with Sally, while I sat up all night, watching every moment for the flames to burst out from some of my buildings. The 2 guards came into my room and laid themselves by my fire for the night. I could not close my eyes, but kept walking to and fro, watching the fires in the distance, and dreading the approaching day, which, I feared, as they had not all passed, would be but a continuation of horrors. November 20th, 1864. This is the blessed Sabbath, the day upon which he who came to bring peace and goodwill upon earth rose from his tomb and ascended to intercede for us poor fallen creatures. But how unlike this day to any that have preceded it in my once quiet home. I had watched all night, and the dawn found me watching for the moving of the soldiery that was encamped about us. Oh, how I dreaded those that were to pass, as I supposed they would straggle and complete the ruin that the others had commenced, for I had been repeatedly told that they would burn everything as they passed. Some of my women had gathered up a chicken that the soldiers shot yesterday, and they cooked it with some yams for our breakfast, the guard complaining that we gave them no supper. They gave us some coffee, which I had to make in a tea kettle, as every coffee pot is taken off. The rear guard was commanded by Colonel Carlo, who changed our guard, leaving us one soldier while they were passing. They marched directly on, scarcely breaking ranks. Once a bucket of water was called for, but they drank without coming in. About 10 o'clock they had all passed save one, who came in and wanted coffee made, which was done, and he too went on. A few minutes elapsed, and two couriers riding rapidly passed back. Then presently more soldiers came by, and this ended the passing of Sherman's army by my place, leaving me poorer by $30,000 than I was yesterday morning, and a much stronger rebel. After the excitement was a little over, I went up to Mrs. Laura's to sympathize with her, for I had no doubt but that her husband was hanged. She thought so, and we could see no way for his escape. We all took a good cry together. While there, I saw smoke looming up in the direction of my home, and thought surely the fiends had done their work ere they left. I ran as fast as I could, but soon saw that the fire was below my home. It proved to be the cotton gin belonging to Colonel Pitts. My boys have not come home. I fear they cannot get away from the soldiers. Two of my cows came up this morning, but they were driven off again by the Yankees. I feel so thankful that I have not been burned out, that I have tried to spend the remainder of the day as the Sabbath ought to be spent. Ate dinner out of the oven in Julia's house. Some stew, no bread. She is boiling some corn. My poor servants feel so badly at losing what they have worked for. Meat, the hog meat that they love better than anything else, is all gone. November 21st, 1864. We had the table laid this morning, but no bread or butter or milk. What a prospect for delicacies! My house is a perfect fright. I had brought in Saturday night some 30 bushels of potatoes and 10 or 15 bushels of wheat poured down on the carpet in the L. Then the few gallons of syrup saved was dabbed all about. The backbone of a hog that I had killed on Friday, and which the Yankees did not take when they cleaned out my smokehouse, I found and hid under my bed, and this is all the meat I have. Major Lee came down this evening, having heard that I was burned out, to proffer me a home. Mr. Dorset was with him. The army lost some of their beeves in passing. I sent today and had some driven into my lot, and then sent to Judge Glass to come over and get some. Had 2 killed. Some of Wheeler's men came in, and I asked them to shoot the cattle, which they did. About 10 o'clock this morning, Mr. Joe Perry called. I was so glad to see him that I could scarcely forbear embracing him. I could not keep from crying, for I was sure the Yankees had executed him, and I felt so much for his poor wife. The soldiers told me repeatedly Saturday that they had hung him and his brother James and George Guise. They had a narrow escape, however, and only got away by knowing the country so much better than the soldiers did. They lay out until this morning. How rejoiced I am for his family! All of his negroes are gone, save one man that had a wife here at my plantation. They are very strong secesh. When the army first came along, they offered a guard for the house, but Mrs. Laura told them she was guarded by a higher power and did not thank them to do it. She says that she could think of nothing else all day when the army was passing but of the devil and his host. She had, however, to call for a guard before night, or the soldiers would have taken everything she had. November 22nd, 1864. After breakfast this morning, I went over to my graveyard to see what had befallen that. To my joy, I found it had not been disturbed. As I stood by my dead, I felt rejoiced that they were at rest. Never have I felt so perfectly reconciled to the death of my husband as I do today, while looking upon the ruin of his lifelong labor. How it would have grieved him to see such destruction. Yes, theirs is the lot to be envied. At rest, rest from care, rest from heartaches, from trouble. Found one of my large hogs killed just outside the graveyard. Walked down to the swamp looking for the wagon and gear that Henry had before he was taken off. Found some of my sheep. Came home very much wearied, having walked over 4 miles. Mr. and Mrs. Rockmore called. Major Lee came down again after some cattle, and while he was here the alarm was given that more Yankees were coming. I was terribly alarmed and packed my trunks with clothing, feeling assured that we should be burned out now. Major Lee swore that he would shoot, which frightened me, for he was intoxicated enough to make him ambitious. He rode off in the direction whence it was said they were coming. Soon after, however, he returned, saying it was a false alarm, that it was some of our own men. Oh dear! Are we to always be living in fear and dread? Oh, the horrors of war! November 26, 1864. A very cold morning. Elbert, the negro coachman, has to go to mill this morning, and I shall go with him, fearing that, if he is alone, my mule may be taken from him, for there are still many straggling soldiers about. Mounted in the little wagon, I went, carrying wheat not only for myself but for my neighbors. Never did I think I would have to go to the mill. Such are the changes that come to us. History tells us of some illustrious examples of this kind. Got home just at night. Mr. Kennedy stopped all night with us. He has been refuging on his way home. Everyone we meet gives us painful accounts of the desolation caused by the enemy. Each one has to tell his or her own experience, and fellow suffering makes us all equal and makes us all feel interested in one another. December 22nd, 1864. Tuesday, the 19th of the month, I attended Floyd Glass's wedding. She was married in the morning to Lieutenant Doherty. She expected to have been married the week after the Yankees came, but her groom was not able to get here. Some of the Yankees found out in some way that she was to have been married and annoyed her considerably by telling her that they had taken her sweetheart prisoner. that when he got off the train at the circle, they took him, and some said shot him. The Yankees found Mrs. Glass's china and glassware that she had buried in a box, broke it all up, and then sent her word that she would set no more fine tables. They also got Mrs. Perry's silver. December 23rd, 1864. Just before night, Mrs. Robert Rakestraw and Miss Mary drove up to spend the night with me. They had started down into Jasper, hoping to get back their buggy, having heard that several buggies were left at Mr. Whitfield's by the Yankees. Nothing new. It is confidently believed that Savannah has been evacuated. I hear nothing from my boys. Poor fellows, how I miss them. December 24th, 1864. This has usually been a very busy day with me, preparing for Christmas, not only for my own tables, but for gifts for my servants. Now how changed! No confectionery, cakes, or pies can I have. We are all sad. No loud, jovial laugh from our boys is heard. Christmas Eve, which has ever been gaily celebrated here, which has witnessed the popping of firecrackers and the hanging up of stockings, is an occasion now of sadness and gloom. I have nothing even to put in Sadie's stocking, which hangs so invitingly for Santa Claus. How disappointed she will be in the morning, though I have explained to her why he cannot come. Poor children! Why must the innocent suffer with the guilty? December 25th, 1864. Sadie jumped out of bed very early this morning to feel in her stocking. She could not believe but that there would be something in it. Finding nothing, she crept back into bed, pulled the cover over her face, and I soon heard her sobbing. The little negroes all came in. "Christmas gift, mistis! Christmas gift, mistis!" I pulled the cover over my face and was soon mingling my tears with Sadie's. January 30th, 1865. As the moon has changed, Julia has gone to making soup again. She is a strong believer in the moon, and never undertakes to boil her soup on the wane of the moon. "It won't thicken, mistis. See if it does." She says, too, we must commence gardening this moon. I have felt a strong desire today that my captured boys might come back. Oh, how thankful I should feel to see them once more safe at home. April 29th, 1865. Boys plowing in old house field. We are needing rain. Everything looks pleasant, but the state of our country is very gloomy. General Lee has surrendered to the victorious Grant. Well, if it will only hasten the conclusion of this war, I am satisfied. There has been something very strange in the whole affair to me, and I can attribute it to nothing but the hand of Providence working out some problem that has not yet been revealed to us poor erring mortals. At the beginning of the struggle, the minds of men, their wills, their self-control, seemed to be all taken from them in a passionate antagonism to the coming in President, Abraham Lincoln. Our leaders, to whom the people looked for wisdom, led us into this, perhaps the greatest error of the age. "We will not have this man to rule over us," was their cry. For years it has been stirring in the hearts of Southern politicians that the North was enriched and built up by Southern labor and wealth. Men's pockets were always appealed to, and appealed to so constantly that an antagonism was excited which it has been impossible to allay. They did not believe that the North would fight. Said Robert Toombs, "I will drink every drop of blood they will shed." Oh, blinded men! Rivers deep and strong have been shed, and where are we now? A ruined, subjugated people. What will be our future is the question which now rests heavily upon the hearts of all. This has been a month never to be forgotten. 2 armies have surrendered. The President of the United States has been assassinated, Richmond evacuated, and Davis, President of the Confederacy, put to grief, to flight. The old flag has been raised again upon Sumter, and an armistice accepted. May 7th, 1865. Sunday evening. Had company every day last week. Paroled soldiers returning to their homes. Last night a Mr. and Mrs. Adams, refugees from Alberta, who have been spending the time in Eatonton, called to stay all night. I felt as though I could not take them in. I had purposely kept in the back part of the house all the evening with my blinds down and door locked, to keep from being troubled by soldiers, and had just gone into my room with a light, when someone knocked at the door and wanted shelter for himself and family. I could not turn away women and children, so I took them in. Found them very pleasant people. They had government wagons along, and he had them guarded all night. I feared there was something in them which had been surrendered and belonged to the United States, but he assured me that with the exception of the mules and wagon, all belonged to himself. He said that he left Jeff Davis at Washington in this state on Thursday morning last. His enemies are in close pursuit of him, offering 100,000 reward to his captors. May 14th, 1865. Mr. Knowles, our circuit preacher, came. I like him. We agree upon a good many contested topics. He loves the old flag as well as myself, and would be glad to see it floating where it ever has. I had a long conversation with my man Elbert today about freedom, and told him I was perfectly willing, but wanted direction. He says the Yankees told Major Lee's servants they were all free, but they had better remain where they were until it was all settled, as it would be in a month's time. We heard so many conflicting rumors, we know not what to do, but are willing to carry out the orders when we know them. May 29th, 1865. Dr. Williams from Social Circle came this morning to trade me a horse. He tells me the people below are freeing their servants and allowing those to stay with them that will go on with their work and obey as usual. What I shall do with mine is a question that troubles me day and night. It is my last thought at night and the first in the morning. I told them several days ago they were free to do as they liked, but it is my duty to make some provisions for them. I thank God that they are freed, and yet what can I do with them? They are old and young, not profitable to hire. What provision can I make? December 24th, 1865. It has been many months since I wrote in this journal, and many things of interest have occurred. But above all, I give thanks to God for His goodness in preserving my life and so much of my property for me. My freedmen have been with me and have worked for 1/6 of my crop. This is a very rainy, unpleasant day. How many poor freedmen are suffering? Thousands of them must be exposed to this pitiless rain. Oh, that everybody would do right, and there would not be so much suffering in the world. Sadie and I are alone in the house. We have been reading, talking, and thus spending the hours until she went to bed, that I might play Santa Claus. Her stocking hangs invitingly in the corner. Happy child and childhood that can be so easily made content. December 25th, 1865. Sadie woke very early and crept out of bed to her stocking. Seeing it well filled, she soon had a light, and 8 little negroes around her, gazing upon the treasures. Everything opened that could be divided was shared with them. "'Tis the last Christmas, probably, that we shall be together, freedmen. Now you will, I trust, have your own homes, and be joyful under your own vine and fig tree, with none to molest or make afraid." This is the end of A Woman's Wartime Journal. About the author. Dolly Sumner Lunt was born in Bowdoinham, Maine. As a relative of Charles Sumner, she was brought up immersed in the abolitionist movement. Dolly married Samuel Harding Brown Lewis. Their first child, Susan Littlefield Lewis, was born in 1840. The young family moved to Georgia in 1842. 2 years later, 4-year-old Susan died of bronchitis while they were staying in Covington with Dolly's married sister in April 1844. Dolly had a second child, Orrington Lewis, born in 1843, but he died in infancy. Then, later that same year, Dolly's husband died of congestive fever at the age of 27. As a young widow, Dolly moved in with her sister in Covington and got a job teaching school. There, she met and married her second husband, Thomas Burge, a Southern gentleman, widowed father of 4, and owner of the Burge plantation. They had one child, a daughter, Sadie, before Thomas Burge died in 1858 of tuberculosis, leaving Dolly to manage the plantation on her own in the days leading up to the Civil War. Dolly was married for a third time in 1866 to a prominent Methodist minister and charter member of the Board of Trustees of Emory College, the Reverend William Parks. She moved to his home in Oxford while managing the Burge plantation in absentia. She lived in Oxford until Parks' death in 1873. Thank you for stopping by, Lady Carrie Ann. Please subscribe, like, and share. Count your many blessings each and every day.